So hi everybody, thank you for joining us from all over the world and all of you who are here for this conversation. We're at the Sustainable Impact Hub here in Davos. You can't quite see it, but outside there's feet of snow. We're in a nice little warm, cozy spot to talk about humanitarian financing. I know there have been a lot of discussions today about really the most important topics here at Davos. This is a place where people talk about business, they talk about big geopolitical questions, but at least in my mind, I think in the minds of people in this hub, the most important issues on Earth today have to deal with the people who are most vulnerable and who are suffering. If you're watching this, chances are you know that we are in an unusual state in the world, that we're at a historic level of humanitarian crisis. That's kind of widely understood. The key question that we want to get into in this discussion today is the money. Where does it come from? How do we find new and innovative ways to raise it? How can we actually generate the resources required to deal with the scale of challenge that we have today? So we've got an incredible group to help launch this conversation, and we're going to just jump right into it if we can. So Peter Maurer is here. You lead the International Committee for the Red Cross. This is a widely known and respected organization around the world. I think people know it well. So you've been in this for years, and you've been on the front line of this of these challenges. Just maybe start us off with the scale of what we're dealing with today. Why is this a unique moment in humanitarian action?
Well, indeed, this is a conversation we have very often at the ICRC. We are 155 years, and many of my colleagues tell me, what's new? Why do you get excited about the present situation? Is it worse than any time before? And there are indicators that it's worse in terms of population in need of humanitarian assistance. Kristalina Georgieva just a minute ago reminded us that together this would represent the 8th largest country in the world. In terms of people displaced by violence and war, here again we are hitting record numbers. And all the scientists who are calculating the impact and the financial impact of war and violence and conflict come to the conclusion that it's somewhere around 10+% of global GDP. So these are all indicators that we are in a serious problem.
And it's not a blip, it's not a one-time thing that's going to go away next year or the year after, right?
There is not too much hope, very frankly. What we have seen over the last 5-7 years is an extension of conflict, more fragile situations extending, more protracted, long-term, complicated conflicts continuing and not finding any political solutions. And there is not so much perspective that anytime soon we will find a turn of the tide. So we are witnessing this simple mathematics where needs are growing exponentially and financial means at best linearly. And so while we do every month more, the result is less for people. So that's the problem statement. And from here, we have to find how to solve some of the solutions.
And yet we're in a world awash in money. And you hear that here in Davos. It's a place where you have major corporations, billionaire philanthropists, wealthy governments. So we do have this real challenge, yet there's money. And that's where kind of financial engineering comes in. Kimberly Geyer, we can call you to be the humanitarian banker for the purpose of this discussion. You've come from the world of structured finance. You know how to do deals in the private sector.
I love to do deals.
And you're bringing that to the humanitarian space.
Yes.
And we need it.
You need it. And I think having the government and the humanitarian actor alongside a banker turned philanthropist. So I call myself a strategic philanthropist, and the group of people that I lead are people who want to give their skills in this space. As you said, there's people who've made a lot of money out of finance, who have been invested with a great skill set that has done great things for companies, for individuals. It's time for some of those people to figure out how they can give that skill back to humanity. And these next solutions will come from partnerships between government money being leveraged, humanitarians at the tables putting the problems, in the center, and getting the best minds from the finance sector and the insurance sector and other places to collectively solve these problems. It's going to take all of us, and the Humanitarian Impact Bond that the ICRC just launched, with outstanding support from the Belgian humanitarian funds, is a prime example of all of those actors coming together, including a philanthropic donation of a skill set to make it a reality.
I want to come back to that because I think it's a great example, but I want to get you into the discussion too. The Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, give us a sense of how you balance this conversation in your own country, where you've got taxpayers, voters saying, hey, we got problems at home. We are already donating a lot to humanitarian challenge. The scale is growing. what do you expect from us? How do you balance that as a government leader?
Well, I think one of the elements is that you need to be much clearer in communicating first the needs, and I think Peter, you did that well. What are the ways we are tackling them, and we are today operating in a very different way than what we were doing in the 70s. The problem is that often people still have on their mind humanitarian intervention the way it has been done 50 years ago. The world has moved on since then, and we work in a very different way.
Yeah, people picture the truck with the bags of grain getting loaded off, and that's kind of humanitarian aid, right?
And people still have this feeling like, okay, well, people have needs, and we have some old stuff. Let's ship the old stuff there, and it's going to help them. That is in a mindset which is a giving mindset. I think that what we have to do is we have to move from a giving mindset to an investing mindset, and that is, I think, where your intervention comes in. If we are really clear, when we give something, let's say I give you a present. Why do I give something? Well, it's also because it makes me feel good. Right? Do you actually really need it? If you do, it's good. If not, well, in any case, I gave you something. Investing is different. That is a long-term perspective. That is understanding what the real needs are. Maybe a last element. In times where communication is being reduced to 13 seconds and really short statements, sometimes you just need to be very straightforward and just say, look, if we do not fund schools in, let's say, Palestinian refugee camps, this is going to be the place where extremism is going to breed, and this is the place where you will be getting terrorists graduating to come to Europe. If we help people on site, the pressure to come to Europe is going to come down. This is very cutting corners, straight communication, but that is actually how you can convince people.
Yeah, there's a cost to not investing as
Exactly.
well as a cost to make the investment. Yeah, Peter, it makes me think that this example of a present, in our own daily lives, we give presents for holidays and birthdays and things like that. And it would feel a bit impersonal if the only gift we gave to people as a present were money. But in the humanitarian space, because it's different, because it's about an investment or a result, there is now a big movement to say, why don't we just give money to the people who need it and let them make decisions? Tell us about that movement. Why are people going in that direction? Why does it make sense?
Well, from our experience over the last couple of years, we see that this has enormous potential. But we have also to be aware where it has the potential and where it has its limits. You can give money to people if there is at least residual functioning markets. You need to have something to buy. And here I think what Alexander described before is very much, I very much concur. I think what we try to do is shifting from donation to investment. Money gives you a possibility as soon as there are markets, and then it's great because then you can support businesses, you can support self-help movements, and you don't need to frame and to touch it as donation. But on the other hand, there are also those places where you can't functioning through money, and you still have to do some form of donation in emergency contexts. What we are really looking is how can we attach impact philanthropy, impact investment, how can we use the impact as a means of encouraging more donations and other donations, because people are not troubled to give more. They are troubled to give more if they don't know for what.
Right.
And I see here in Davos and beyond throughout the year, as soon as you can demonstrate that what you put on the table is something which changes really the lives in a direction of self, of autonomy of people, of self-reliance, of industrious activities by the people themselves, that's an enormously encouraging factor. So I think it is important that we still cater for the residual situations where donations are necessary in emergency contexts in order to stabilize lives and livelihoods of people who can't otherwise. But we have much too extensively interpreted those phases in the past, and we have to reduce their scope and go into the other direction.
Right, and this is a key element of moving to an era where you can get other sources of finance, because people aren't going to make an investment if they don't know what they're buying. There has to be that result, that measurement. So where are we in that process? In other words, you've helped to structure and part of this humanitarian impact bond. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that. Basically, it's a way of making sure the donations that are made to pay for a result. So if those results if they're not achieved, and I guess in this case it's ICRC, your people are on the line down there in DRC and Nigeria and other places doing the work. If the results aren't achieved, the money doesn't flow. So how do you measure those results? Are we at the point where you can do that in a sophisticated enough way for investors to have confidence in giving their money?
Yes, you can. And I think the measures are actually quite simple at the end of the day. I mean, in the case of the impact bond, it's an efficiency measure. It's pretty simple to measure. So that's not really the issue. I think the next step is what comes next and what is designed specifically for the humanitarian space. So the impact bonds have come from the development space and they can be applied to the humanitarian world. But some of the challenges that Peter and his team face are very different. They're not all development style settings like a physical rehabilitation center that the bond was designed for. What about conflicts triggers, insurance techniques, contingent financing, smarter money? And this is where I think governments will be interested. If you can get in front of the humanitarian action, if you can get involved sooner, if you can make the money flow faster and earlier before you have to wait for the problem to compound, that's smarter money, and any investor will understand that.
Right. If you're talking about cost effectiveness, it's much cheaper to prevent the problem than to wait until people are in real need.
And if you have an insurance policy, for example, maybe a donor is paying a premium, and the trigger of that insurance policy is being paid out by the private sector. So you're transferring the risk to the private sector. Right now, we're going to governments to ask for money. If the government could get their head around paying a premium, we could transfer the risk to the private sector. But it's going to take all of us working together to work pretty hard to work through some of these issues. These are regulatory issues, these are new products, and new products take people coming together and rolling up their sleeves and being willing to, see whether it can happen.
You mentioned the bonds in the development space. At DevX, we've covered this extensively, and there's only a few development impact bonds in the world. There's a lot of talk about them. You hear them all the time here in Davos, but you kind of count it on one hand, and they've taken years to develop, and we don't have years. We have this urgency that Peter so correctly laid out for us in the beginning. So where are we in this process? In other words, if we meet again a year from now in Davos, do you feel like the momentum is there to create products that can be scaled quickly around the world? How do you see this given your perspectives?
Well, I think that we launched it 2 years ago here together with Peter, and so 2 years later we finally have it. This has been quite a journey for a number of reasons. One of them is the talk versus now we're going to do something. That is a big step. Also for governments, this is not an easy thing to have, like financial inspections and so on handle. And then find the right investment model was not so easy. We could have shortcutted that in saying, look, we will subsidize it. And then, yes, it happens, but then we haven't proved anything. We really wanted to prove that this is something that could work in a rational investment perspective. I have to applaud the ICRC for doing this, because this is really, we have put a step forward in the way of functioning of the ICRC. This is really a gigantic leap, because this is completely changing the way financing has been seen and the way you should organize. And I understand that this is out of a perspective that we need to be more results based if we want to get access to all that capital that you talked about. I think that there is a lot of capital in the world, but you need to understand that the decision process for even philanthropic funds and for private capital is a very different process than the way we as governments work. And reorganizing your operations towards more result effectiveness is one of the ways that you can do that. Maybe a last element which I often have to explain is that in a political debate, there are often people would say yes, and we have heard you for the last years talk about private sector and so on, but everyone knows that the private sector will do cherry picking and will only invest in those places which are the easiest one. And here we prove that it is not. We are investing in Nigeria, we are investing in the DRC. These are the most difficult places in the world, in something which is not an easy thing, which are rehabilitation centers. And we have proven that it is possible to convince the private sector to invest in.
And the way you convince the private sector is by saying you only pay if there are results. The results are measurable, they're valid, and so we're removing the risk. Yes, it's DRC, yes, it's Nigeria, but the risk is being reduced.
And we embrace something which I think is normal, but which is a bit controversial in the development in humanitarian space, is profit. And we basically say that profit is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes an uneasy discussion.
Sure.
Can you make a profit on rehabilitation centers? If the impact is way higher than what we used to do before, if this is bringing in new sources of capital, I think you can. We are talking about sustainability. There is no sustainable activity in the economic world if you're not making profits. Now, I'm not pleading here for monopoly profits and for fiscal evasion and so on. That I will fight with any force I have. But a reasonable profit in exchange for a certain risk, I think it is totally acceptable.
I'm sure, Peter, you had those debates inside the movement you lead.
Yeah, very much. And I agree with Alexander that the big shift is a cultural shift in looking differently at the problem. I think even the notion of profit is at the end of the day has a wrong connotation. As Alexander just explained, it's a risk prime. And I think a lot depends also on the vocabulary and framing of the issue that you do. What I think is important as well is that while we operate in highly unstable situations, there are recurring problems that we know and we understand quite well. And I think the scalability and speed of these new tools depends on our ability as well to describe those problems in a way which is not reflecting instability, but which basically tells us what the risk is and what we can gain in early action. I had a great discussion yesterday on malnutrition, food security challenges. We know that there is a regularity of factors which lead to food security challenges. So is there anything we can mobilize, because early action promises less deep impact? So the question is, can we structure a product around a deep sort of analytical recognition of some of the problems that we encounter recurringly in unstable situations? In the past, investors have looked at those fragile contexts as just fragile, volatile, not worthwhile investment. While we are trying to tell them it's actually foreseeable what happens. And we know pretty well what the dynamics are. And if we can structure around those recurring regularities, financial products, then you are in the logic of shifting the balance from donation to market logic. And then you can accept that there are different mixes of tools, from philanthropy to profit. And there is a bandwidth of activities here to define, and a bandwidth of tools also, as I know from conversations with Kim.
You alluded to this. I just want to follow up on that because, when Ebola struck, it was incredible that so many governments weren't ready to put the money in. It was private philanthropy, it was groups like MSF, groups like yours that have their own funding and own funding mechanisms to jump in. So my question is, have we moved from that era when the next pandemic strikes or the next major catastrophe? Are governments ready to put money up immediately because these financing mechanisms have been built?
Well, I think it's starting to pick up. The World Bank has put forward a pandemic insurance, an insurance scheme. The question is, as I mentioned beforehand, can we work around food security and define a scheme around? I think we know that there are water scarcities, recurring water scarcities. Can we build financial tools around those issues? I think this is the moment. I truly feel that we are at the crossroads.
Yeah.
We have tested and fiddled around pilot projects, and the whole question is, can we now make a clearer problem statement from the humanitarian community? Can we explore some of those different options that Kimberly has mentioned beforehand? And we will have to do a learning exercise. No, success is not guaranteed. We may probably fail here and there, but that's the very essence of learning.
That's right. I called you the humanitarian banker, Kimberly. We're going to need thousands of humanitarian bankers,
Yes.
right? We're going to need that needs to be a profession, and it's something you're helping to build with your network, something that's just common in our space.
That's something that I'm passionate about, because I don't want people to have to wait till they're at the end of their careers, to give back. And I see it every day. I see it with my own children. They want to do more earlier. They don't want to wait till they've made their money. And frankly, you're too busy by the time you're immersed in your career. So I'm lucky enough that I have time to give back now. And my other people in my network, my women's network, have time now. But the young people need to get this earlier.
Yeah.
It needs to be part of the management education system. And I can see a platform for banks and insurers to rotate people through a platform like this. How engaging for your employees to have the benefit of working on a transaction like this, when it's not a mortgage-backed security that you're selling. It's actually structuring something to help with food insecurity. So I think that there's a lot of work to do here, and by coming together with academics, governments, philanthropists, it is the next phase. This is truly collaboration, and it's absolutely within reach. We're already doing it. The question is, how do you scale it? And we need good partners to be willing to test and come on board.
And the critical issue, Kimberly just mentioned it, and referring to her children, the question is whether society is changing, and whether we can also use and thrive on a value change in society. If you want to have triple bottom line profit, you won't get it from the humanitarian community. If there is impact and value, which is valued in a financial scheme, which is closer to market, then we can discuss. That's an equation to then discuss the details. But this drives, at the end of the day, on change in society. The overall, I know from traditional financial institutions, if you have to go back to your shareholders and you tell